And if you fuck with me, you'll have to lick my boot.
Warning, this podcast contains violence, sexuality, gore, and other horrible and disturbing things. Listener discretion is advised. Also, the hosts of this venture are ignorant dipshits, so please do not take anything they say as fact. And enjoy the show.
Now, are you sitting comfortably? Good. Then we'll begin.
Today we had 15 homicides and 63 violent crimes, as if that's the way it's supposed to be.
It is our basic human right to be fucked up.
A second plane now has crashed into the other tower of the World Trade Center.
Putting chemicals in the water that turn the friggin' frogs gay.
The defendant shall be incarcerated for the rest of her natural life with no possibility of parole.
You are not machines. You are not cattle. You are men.
We were somewhere around Barstow, on the edge of the desert, when the drugs began to take hold.
Hello and welcome to Occulte Veritatis podcast. I am Sageberry, and joining me we have
Leon Felger,
Ood Gallifrey,
Richard Bigley,
the Soundboard Demon,
and our guests
Henry Chapman
and Geo the Void. Today marks the very first collab episode between myself and Ood Gallifrey. It was too big for one of us to tackle alone. Please enjoy Aum Shinrikyo, and I didn't write any other kind of intro to the poison.
Prepare for anime and anthrax. Let's drink some poison.
Yeah.
So, what's your poison?
The poison today is Gekikan Sake.
Or if you're Leon Felger, BioSteel.
BioSteel is a product that was found at a Dollarama.
BioSteel?
Can you read anything off the label for us there?
Sports drink, boisson pour sport, drink BioSteel, not sugar, buvez pas de sucre BioSteel, rainbow twist, mélange arc en ciel. It tastes like a melted freezy.
Cool.
Ah.
The poison is Gekikan Sake, which often has a bit of a salty taste to it. It is a fortified wine made of rice.
I love sake, but I like it hot better, but I like it like this still.
I like it hot, too.
Fun fact.
So does Marilyn Monroe.
Everyone that's white will tell you that sake must be drunk hot, and hot the color of blood or the temperature of blood. But Japanese people just drink it kind of however, like room temperature is really common.
Like a tea? Oh, like you're saying
it's
hot,
better when
like,
it's hot. Yeah, like
really?
hot like a tea.
Wow.
They say it should either be 50 degrees or minus 20, like real cold or real hot, or room temperature.
Mm-hmm.
Although in the wintertime, often is drunk hot, and in the summertime, often is drunk cold.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of like the British, where in the summertime they will drink hot tea, as opposed to in the wintertime where they'll drink hot tea.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, it tastes like port. Like, I mean, I don't know, there's always a tradition of drinking a bunch of port at military suppers and all that, so...
Port is way sweeter than this.
But this leaves like a starchy, almost like feel on my tongue after I swallow it.
Yeah, it's like, reminds me of the mead that we brew from time to time.
Yeah.
A little less sweet because it's usually a honey brew. I will always rate alcohol low as like, again, like a pretty male, like a 5 out of 10. Like it's alcohol.
I'm sure you could mix it with some stuff to make it more flavorful, you know?
Yeah, this would be a good basis for a cocktail, I think.
I think so, yeah.
I've had a really good Caesar with sake.
Really?
It's yeah.
Oh, that might be
that.
good.
It's very good. Yeah.
Because I don't like vodka Caesars very much, but a sake Caesar, that sounds kind of nice actually.
Mm-hmm.
With a bacon straw. I don't know why.
I feel like I'm more for the bacon straw than. I mean, we have all the things we could make a sake lemon drop, which is 3 ounces of sake, an ounce of freshly squeezed lemon juice, or in our case, we just fucking put the real lemon in, and an ounce of simple syrup.
Yes, I would rate this sake a 7 out of 10. I would give it an 8 out of 10 if it was hot.
You know, this is pretty damn pleasing. Like, it's pretty nondescript, but it goes down easy, and
I feel like you're describing me.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
Goes down easy.
Goes down easy.
Yeah.
A little bit plain.
Yeah. Leaves a starchy residue on my tongue.
Yeah.
8 out of 10 if you were hot.
Yeah, 8 out of 10 if it was hot. This alcohol is the embodiment of my soul life.
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah, you and Sake share a soul.
Really just Sake Murray now.
Yep.
Leon, tell us about your biofuel.
Okay, so I'm rating this 187 days sober today.
Yay.
Awesome.
It tastes like melted freezy. It's not very
Yeah.
good. It's not as good as Powerade. It's not as good as an energy drink. It's just BioSteel. It's unfortunate.
I think that's everybody.
All right. I have the beginning section, which is his early life, the guy that started Aum Shinrikyo.
What I'm about to play you to introduce this episode is the leader of Aum Shinrikyo, Shoko Asahara, going on a well-regarded, popular Japanese talk show in the mid-90s. Now, the cult was notorious at this stage, but not yet publicly known as being genocidal. I couldn't find any version where this interview was dubbed in English, so myself and Geo the Void have dubbed the audio for you.
誰が見てもこれインチキ臭いですけども。そうですね。でもなんかこの私に合ってますからいいですけどね。そうです。で今日はですね、楽しみですね。
I wanted to ask you a question. Today in society, there is a period of religious growth, or rather, a growing number of new religions. What do you think about this development?
Whatever happens, happens. Currently, the people have gained big amounts of wealth, but they realize it doesn't bring satisfaction. Therein, there are those that undertake the search of their inner world. It is likely that eventually this time arrives.
In your organization, there are many young people. What are young people looking for in a religion?
The people who have passed the time of famine formed the following scheme. Live means to work, and work means to live a rich life. So young people since childhood live a rich life, and then they become aware of the suffering and vanity on the opposite side of wealth. That's why it's natural for youth to start aspiring to something bigger in this materialistic world, than this materialistic society.
The practice of Aum Shinrikyo differs from other religions because disciples talk about the difficulties of life and suffering. Is that correct?
Yes, I got surprised again that the point of view of religion, acknowledging suffering, is the essence of the way to Mahamurda, the supreme enlightenment. Within Northern Buddhism, the Buddhism that came to Japan from India through China and Tibet, Tibetan Buddhism is considered the best. In Tibetan Buddhism, the Mahamurda is considered supreme enlightenment. It is a technique that allowed bringing light to the hidden sufferings that disciples have had since the beginning. The Guru, the spiritual master, manifests these sufferings and deletes them. The Mahamurda means the freedom of consciousness through the manifestation and removal of the suffering of disciples.
This doctrine is easy to understand, but making this journey is, in fact, extremely difficult, right?
No, it's not like that. A person consists of a body, sensations, will, and finally the information of his experiences. If all these become clean one after another, anyone can reach enlightenment.
One thing has tortured me since childhood, why we, who call ourselves humans, live and work and have to introduce something through our mouths and delete it in the form of excrement. I was always amazed why this condition of life for human beings has never changed. Always unclean. At the level of atoms and molecules, nothing dies. The shape does not change. I think that the food just passes through us. If it is necessary to kill to continue living, does it make any sense to train the consciousness? What do you think about that? Maybe I fell into infantilism?
No, you did not fall into infantilism. This is also one of the Buddhist secrets of meditation. Namely, the meditation on what the body sees as unclean. This meditation does not mean the denial of our unclean body. It allows us to stay away from the physical body and create another body that is our essence. You can consider the essence body at the level of atoms and molecules. This new body does not need water or food. Only by means of absorbing energy from space can we stay in a wonderful consciousness state and receive a beautiful experience. If you are thinking such things since childhood, it demonstrates clearly that in your past lives you had reached the step that Buddhists call those who do not return.
How was my past life?
As I said, if you reach the step of those who do not return, we, the humans, can say he was a god in the world of shapes. In the world of shapes live the gods, who concern themselves with the creation and destruction of the universe. Until a person reaches an experience of the world of shapes, a person cannot think the same way you would, having recently talked about excrements. Therefore, I am sure you, at least a few times, have lived in the world of gods. I was a god.
In regard to my job on television and other places, I often get surprised and ask myself, what am I doing here? I prefer to leave all of this, but it will be better for me to stay. It is very difficult to resign from all of this.
You don't have to leave anything. In a way, you are one of those people who can greatly influence other people. In other words, you have charisma. Charisma is nothing else but wisdom given by the gods, and you have it. If you use it exactly, influencing young people positively, your life will be beautiful.
In regard to my job on television and other places, I often get surprised and ask myself, what am I doing here? I prefer to leave all this. I want to talk to Mr. Asahara. I'd like to have another program where we could speak for over 20 hours, until dawn, for several days. What if we made a program called The Talk Until Dawn? Would I be a good disciple? Can you imagine me being the leader wearing violet clothes tomorrow?
No disciple, not even one with your innate talent, could be the leader of Aum Shinrikyo besides me. But you have a truly balanced mind. That is why you would probably receive a mystical experience quickly.
I don't think if I left work that I would calm down. Work is most important to me. If I left it, I would not feel at ease. I don't think if I left work that I would calm down. Work is most important to me. If I left it, I would not feel at ease.
Listen, regardless of the experience you had in childhood, I think someday you will leave the job. In Buddhist traditions, a person who is not successful in the worldly life cannot attain enlightenment. It is said that if the reflection is not sharp, it is impossible to attain enlightenment. So you will leave this job in probably a few years.
In 5 years, I will either kill myself or leave everything. I'll probably be tired. But in 5 years, I may say 5 more years. Then 6 years will pass, then 7. And I will continue to say, in 5 more years. I've been doing this for 49 years already. Therefore, in 5 years, I will either leave work or die.
Yes. However, I think that within 5 years, you will not die.
Shoko Asahara was born on the 2nd of March, 1955. His birth name was Shizuo Matsumoto. His family were poor and made tatami mats in the Kukamoto prefecture. Those were just like little cheap-ass mats, basically, I think for helping clean rice or something.
Yeah, it help separates like the shell of the rice from the grain on the inside?
Yeah, something like that.
I think.
No, tatami mats are just mats you put on the floor.
Are they?
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh.
Okay.
Like anytime you have those really cheap beach mats that are like really thin, like reeds with little pieces of string holding together, kind of like the Chinese calendars you get from Chinese food places that just have like the little slats with like.
Oh yeah.
That's kind of like a tatami mat.
Oh, cool. Okay. So Shoko had infantile glaucoma from birth, which caused him to lose all sight in his left eye and go partially blind in his right eye when he was very young. So because of all this, he had to attend a school for the blind. At school, he was apparently like a giant dick and a bully, taking advantage of the other students by kicking the shit out of them and extorting them for money. From this, we can kind of see that Shoko was super obsessed with money and violence from a young age. In fact, by the time he graduated high school, he had saved over $30,000. I'm not sure if that's yen or dollars.
I think if it's the same article we were reading, it's transferred over to USD.
Okay. So even though he talked a lot about attending medical school, he actually flunked out and never took any exams. Instead, he became an acupuncturist and a traditional Chinese medicine practitioner. It was at this time in 1978 that he met a college student named Tomoko Ishii. They immediately started popping out kids, 12 to be exact. They met and got married and started having a ton of kids.
See, that's something I didn't even know in my I didn't know we had 12 kids before all this shit happened.
Yeah.
Jesus Christ.
It's like
Family
the
man.
Quiverful.
Yeah.
Yeah, wild. In the early 1980s, Shoko opened a shop selling Chinese medicine. He is said to have made hundreds of thousands of dollars selling bogus potions like orange peels in alcohol and promising them to be something else. In 1982, he was convicted of operating without a license and selling unregulated drugs and was fined 200,000 yen. I did put yen in that one.
Most of his life savings. And like his foibles with money didn't stop there. He joined this school of Buddhism called the Aum Shinrikyo School of Buddhism, and it sounds a lot like Japan's version of Scientology. If you wanted guaranteed enlightenment, quote unquote, you would have to give monetary offerings for 1,000 days in a row. And after his conviction and after he got charged all that money for selling fake medicine, he was broke, desperate, and struggling to support his family, but he still gave to this school for 1,000 days in a row. And he wasn't enlightened by the end of it, and he realized it was a sham. So he decided he would start his own enlightenment group. If he couldn't find it, he would make it. And he formed Aum Shinrikyo no Kai. He started small. He printed off yoga pamphlets and offering yoga classes and herbal healing in his cramped one-bedroom apartment. Soon after he started, he gained his first disciple that started to live with him and do chores for him, and soon more followed. He struggled financially. At first, he refused money and gifts for his classes, maybe based on some kind of principle. Maybe he was trying to make people believe that he was more holy than he was or something like that, but at the first he refused to receive money. A few years later, he took a pilgrimage to India, and he said that he met some quote-unquote spiritual masters, and then he decided, okay, now I'm going to accept money, and he gained a whole bunch of money and wealth from all the people who were willing to donate to him.
The guru steps into the myth of the hero, but it's a hero on moral terms. And the guru has to follow that myth, which means a call to greatness and undergoing ordeals, which he overcomes in order to become, in this case, a spiritual leader. And Asahara had ambitions that were quite secular. He once said, or more than once said, that he wanted to be Prime Minister of Japan and that he also wanted to be a great physician. But he did fail his examinations, as he told the story, for Tokyo University after going to a cram school, a very frequent process in Japan. As he has constructed his myth, he said that he reached a point where he wondered whether he could go on, where he knew that his life had to change. He began groping, as he put it, for an answer. And he tried out various religions, including a very well-known new religion called Agonshu, where he found the model of a guru in an outstanding religious leader named Kiriyama, from whom he learned a great deal, and also took many of his ideas about Tibetan Buddhism and about New Age influences, which he also brought eventually to Aum Shinrikyo. But a guru must have visions, and he had two predominant visions. The first, which he had in 1985 at the age of 30, which involved the great Hindu god Shiva, or Shiva as he's sometimes called, in which he, Asahar, was called upon the god of light, as the god of light who leads the armies of the gods against the forces of darkness. And that was the vision around which he formed Aum Shinrikyo. And then there was a second vision later on, which the following year in the Himalayas, where he wandered and which he claimed to experience what he called final enlightenment. And one of the spiritual teachers he had been in contact with expressed surprise about this because he thought it took a lifetime rather than a few days to experience final enlightenment. And you can never quite prove or disprove the experience of enlightenment since it is so personal to oneself. But here one can say that one has to have this kind of conviction of enlightenment, of spiritual attainment, in order to be convincing as a guru. And in his case, as in the case of many gurus, that conviction can be combined with a kind of con man quality and self-promoting talent.
He also used a whole bunch of different tricks to gain notoriety. In his anime and on the different pictures of him, a lot of times you'll see him, quote-unquote, levitating. Really, it's a common photographic trickery. He would just cross his legs and bounce on his butt, and then have somebody take a picture when he was in midair, and then just say, hey, I was levitating. But that got him some notoriety. It got him on a bunch of TV shows, so a bunch of people started to seek him out. And what made him and his cult special is, in my opinion, is he was able to attract more knowledgeable and technically skilled people than a lot of other cults were able to. He was not only able to sway the desperate to join, but also the rich. Scientists, engineers, chemists, lawyers, judges, politicians. A lot of those professionals who had a lot of skills and training joined Aum Shinrikyo.
So the next part is early activity. So even from the beginning of Aum Shinrikyo, it was considered pretty sketchy in Japan. Although no terrible crimes had yet to be committed, again, sorry, spoiler alert, folks still didn't trust them. It was during this early period that Asahara really started getting down with biblical prophecies in addition to his Buddhist beliefs. He wanted to appeal to what he thought were more educated and classy Japanese folks, people that wouldn't just want to take this folk religion and he wanted to like zhuzh it up a bit. Aum's public relations started pushing comics and cartoons that tried to marry their weird religious beliefs to cool anime stuff like badass weapons, space missions, worldwide conspiracies, and the intense search for the ultimate truth.
Can we play a clip of the anime here?
I sure can find one.
Even just the intro.
I couldn't find the dub anywhere.
I found it. I remember I found it once after a lot of searching, so I think it's labeled something weird. Yeah, because he knew a lot of these young people that he was targeting. He knew that they watched anime, and he knew he could reach them if he made an anime himself. So that's just what he did.
Sitting on a mountain with his hair flowing majestically around his face.
Looking like Jesus. Yeah. Bringing up those Christian parallels pretty hard.
Oh, now he's touching his hands together and there's a bright jewel. And then there's a phoenix. And he's in the sky.
He's very holy right now.
Oh, and there's his third eye. With the Aum symbol. He's got magic lightning in his hands.
You learned that from Palpatine, I heard.
Oh, there's a close-up on his eye.
Oh, now he's levitating.
He levitates.
Oh, he levitates above a mountain.
Come on. You can't bounce that high.
Now he looks really stoked to be flying around.
Wouldn't you be?
Yeah, I would be. Oh, he's coming down into a forest. Oh, no, he's in a city now. And he's kind of see-through. Oh, I think he's with Buddha?
Either that or the Avatar. Yeah, I think that's old Aang.
They're both smiling that cute closed eye anime smile.
Oh, now a bunch of Mormons showed up.
Yeah. He's got magical heart brain power.
Yeah. It seems like the one guy is echolocating Ashu. Ashuhara, I should say.
So then a bunch of like missionary magazines were churned out, including Vajrayana Saka and Enjoy Happiness. So he started churning out anime and manga. So they started getting more and more people to join the group because of their slick PR efforts. The Aum Salvation Plan, which is what they named their recruitment efforts, included far-out claims. I don't know why I wrote that. Far-out claims, including being able to cure physical ailments through health improvement techniques, realizing life goals by improving intelligence and through the power of positive thinking, and eschewing leisure in the pursuit of what is important.
That's so actualization nowadays, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Self-actualize.
So this was easily accomplished through the practice of ancient teachings translated from the Pali Sutras, which is the threefold salvation said to have been revealed by the Buddha after he had passed into nirvana. So basically, Aum Shinrikyo had all the answers to all of your shit. So all this super futuristic stuff really appealed to young people and brilliant people. Aum's beliefs in levitation, ESP, and other sci-fi stuff was super appealing. There was an astrophysicist that had ideas that like his school didn't want him to pursue. So he's like, fuck you. And he quit and then joined with Aum Shinrikyo because they were like, yay, levitating. You could do whatever the fuck you want here.
Oh, yeah.
So
the college movie? What was it? Dropout or something?
Oh, with Justin Long?
Yeah, the guy
Accepted.
Accepted. He wants to blow the pineapple up, like, if he can do it. Yeah.
I want to learn how to blow shit up with my mind.
Okay. Write it on the board.
New this summer, Justin Long is Ashihara.
So, like, he was like, yes, please come with me to me with your wacky ideas and also your brilliant minds and non-wacky ideas, which I will use.
In terms of talking about this group, it's important to note that this was not a small band that lived in somebody's mother's basement. This was a full-blown multinational enterprise, literally with tentacles around the world, doing things in a very big way. Probably an estimated value. They estimated their value probably a little high, but it was still somewhere between probably $500 million and $1.5 billion in terms of cash and assets at their disposal. Cult was, as we're probably all well aware, very successful at recruiting well-educated members, scientists, engineers, college-degreed individuals. Now, it's important to note, however, by and large, they recruited these people either from the ranks of college students themselves or people who were just starting out in their professional careers. People, if you will, at the bottom of the corporate or organizational pyramids. And as a consequence, in many cases, they were recruiting people who were a little bit immature in their thinking, a little bit more open to the suggestions of Aum Shinrikyo's leadership. Do not try to look at the words that you see on that screen. They are completely impossible to read. But this diagram is a representation of the way the cult organized itself. Essentially, they took an organization which had been centered around just a very small group of cells and transformed it into a mock government, essentially a shadow government, mirroring elements of the Japanese government itself. There's a Ministry of Defense, there's a Ministry of Justice, there's a Russian ministry to take care of their operations in that country. They had a marketing division and an intelligence ministry. They even had a post office. That was headed by Asahara's wife. Cult's leadership, some interesting individuals in this respect as well. In this picture you see two of them. The gentleman in the green robe to the left, it was the cult's chief scientist, head of their science and technology ministry, Hideo Murai. You may remember he was the man who overslept on his way to Matsumoto. Now, Hideo Murai was by training a nuclear physicist. He was in charge of their weapons of mass destruction program. Hideo Murai was recruited to Aum Shinrikyo, at least in part, when he was offered more research money and better research facilities than he enjoyed in his private sector job. Now the gentleman next to him, the other gentleman in the green robe, who has a little bit different story. This guy was in charge at one point of their Russian operations. He proceeded to serve as the cult's leading spokesman. Now he was on TV so much, and he was in the media so much, and he was a good enough looking, young enough guy that he became something of a teen heartthrob in Japan. There were a number of teen magazines that had his picture on the cover and then said, "Joyu-san, be my boyfriend." Mr. Joyu was a former engineer with the Japanese space program who left and joined the cult because it offered more opportunity.
Another class of people that he seemed to target were known locally in Japan as the otaku class. This is Japanese version of a computer nerd. They're quiet people who spend their time in highly technical jobs, work or hobbies, and they really don't spend any time outside besides their work and their hobbies and staying at home. They're known to have poor social skills and little knowledge of how the world works outside their direct interests. But Ashuhara made it his mission to target these people because he thought these people could be drawn in.
So like Sigma males.
Yeah.
Yeah, Sigma males. Okay.
100%. Like the disaffected people over in the Western world here, he was trying to target those same people in Japan. The same people who were looking for meaning and were frustrated with how life were going and maybe weren't all that successful themselves, he was targeting in large part those people.
Well, that reminds me of just like neurodivergency in that way, because like if they're struggling, they don't have like they struggle with social skills and stuff like that. Speaking from like some experience with that, like more than once, like I've had the whole like gambit of psychosis, mania, and all that kind of stuff. And like if you were into a little bit of psychosis or mania and you watch something that's suggestive, and this will go for like the far right stuff too, you run with it because like you are so desperate for that sense of community.
Even in the professional people he drew from, engineers, scientists, lawyers, and all that, he drew from people who weren't able to adjust socially, who maybe had struggles, who weren't satisfied with their lot in life because they were vulnerable in that way. He kind of reached out to them. He changed both his name and his cult's name. So, like Sage mentioned, his birth name was Shizu, and he changed it to Shoko Asahara. And the cult name changed from Aum Shinrikyo to what it would be during its grand notoriety, Aum Shinrikyo, meaning the supreme truth. By 1988, it grew to 10,000 members, 1,000 of which stayed at a compound that was formerly a dairy farm. And after he got people isolated on that dairy farm and he got access to all that wealth and influence, because all these people are dedicating their time and money to him, his behavior became more severe. Brainwashing and breaking spirits were present before, but now they became more uniform. There are a couple sources, like a lot of this stuff isn't all the way confirmed because sometimes it's just a single escapee that claims it or it's one book that claims it, but there's a whole bunch of little stories about what may have happened in this cult. In some versions, drugs of various kinds, including LSD, mushrooms, other hallucinogens, cocaine, meth, opium, were used to both induce and then relieve states of distress and anxiety over and over again to break them, kind of inducing it and then uninducing it. He also experimented with stuff like implanting electrodes in people's heads. Remember, he got some educated professionals to join his cult, including some doctors and surgeons, and he used their expertise to try and implant electrodes in people's brain. And he was doing it experimentally to see if he could get those people to be more obedient, or if he could wipe their memories with specific electric shocks. Now, he's not a professional. They're not working in a lab or a hospital. These aren't people concerned with medical ethics. They're working within this cult. So what he really did, if this occurred, because a lot of this is unconfirmed, is probably just a lot of brain damage.
Where was ECT at the time of like when this was happening? Like, is this predated or is this like after like
what date are we talking about?
1988.
Oh, this is well into ECT time.
Yeah.
ECT was in decline at the time because, of course, it was seen as a barbaric medical practice before they started using propofol for it in the early 90s. So this would be like in sort of like the dark period of electroconvulsive therapy, and it definitely wipes memory.
Yeah. And it definitely can like reset you as almost a personality. Like it gets you back down to 0 and then they can build you up again.
Oh,
if
yeah.
it works that way, if you don't get, fried.
I think that what he was attempting was more like renegade science. Like he had 2 goals. He wanted to see if he could wipe memories and see if he could make people more obedient. And he was just basically, like, if you believe the witnesses that state this, he was basically ordering his surgeons to place electrodes in different places on different people's heads to see if those different placements, like, had effects or not. Whether one person that had the electrodes at the back of their head was more obedient than the person that had electrodes placed at the front of their head. And that was only the start of his experimentation. That's where things got more extreme. For the general population, for most of the cult, they didn't get the electrodes because that was a lot of involved work. More of what they got was classic brainwashing that you've seen in cults again and again. People would be forced to stay awake for days on time. And when I say forced, it was more like Ashihara wants you to. You have to please the master of this cult. Like, if you want to become enlightened, you better do what he says. So he would have people stay up for days at a time until they became delirious. They were given reduced calories for weeks on end. They were told to exercise until they collapsed from exhaustion. And they were either told to listen to tapes of somebody saying it thousands of times, or told to say it thousands of times themselves, but they were given all these phrases that through one way or another they were supposed to hear or repeat. Phrases like, be well, do good deeds, do your chores, pain is an illusion, perfect yourself in training. And they would be asked to repeat it thousands of times and stay awake while doing it. All the while this brainwashing is happening in all these facilities, their influence was growing. They were buying up properties, they were reaching out to gain new membership, and they were growing in membership and influence and money and power.
The real seminal figure in this story is Shoko Asahara, also his original name Chizuo Matsumoto. 43-year-old venerated master, yogi, holy pope of Aum Shinrikyo. For all I know, leader of the pack may be one of his titles as well. By all accounts, he's extremely charismatic. He was a very talented yoga instructor back in the days when the cult was known as the Temple of the Mountain Wizards, a name they got away from for obvious marketing reasons. Partially blind. In fact, he went to a school for the blind as a young man, as a boy, though exactly how limited his vision is unclear. We do know that he could see well enough when he was in school to sort of dominate his fellow students. We also have reports of him kicking his chauffeur out of the front seat of his Rolls Royce and roaring around downtown Tokyo with himself at the wheel. Maybe a miracle, maybe something else entirely. In his preachings, he talks of himself as being, among other things, the first enlightened one since the Buddha, and also the reincarnation of Jesus Christ. And while it is true that his father was a carpenter, that is about as far as I want to go with that parallel. He also is very much millennialist in his preachings. Again, we go back to the notion of Armageddon, the coming Third World War, the war that will wipe everyone out of Japan except for the cult's true believers, who will come from their hiding places and reestablish Japan to its rightful place. This is, by the way, a theme which is repeated over and over again in Japanese history and Japanese literature, usually the part of a doomed hero who tries to restore Japan to greatness. There's also no question, based on the testimony and the trials, based on the documents, based on the eyewitness reports, that Asahara was very much a hands-on manager of day-to-day operations within this group. It wasn't a case of being a figurehead. It wasn't a case of being a remote character up on top of a mountain somewhere. This man appears to have been in the job of reaching out and saying, okay, you will do this, you will work there, you will get me that. In fact, I'm sure that there's probably an opportunity for writing an MBA thesis on cult management in modern Japan in here somewhere, but I don't think I'm going to go there. A very interesting man, a man who was able to take an organization from nothing, from being a small walk-up yoga academy in 1983, and by 1990 have turned it into a multi-million-dollar enterprise. Asahara had a dream. He dreamed of assuming power in Japan. He believed that the cult His cult, Aum Shinrikyo, represented a state, an independent nation within Japan. He believed that to realize his ambitions, he needed a military capability that was not only loyal to him, but capable of going toe-to-toe with the police or with the defense forces in Japan. Now, to do that, though, he knew he was outgunned. He knew he was outmanned. Therefore, it wasn't a real stretch for him to conclude that the logical path was to pursue weapons of mass destruction, weapons that would enable him to trump the existing forces in Japan. Because the bottom line for Shoko Asahara ni Chizuo Matsumoto was always power. It was power first, power last.
At the center of Aum Shinrikyo's belief is reverence for Shoko Asahara. He claimed to be the first enlightened one since Buddha. He preached that the end of the world was near and that only followers of Aum Shinrikyo would survive the upcoming apocalypse, which he predicted to be in 1996 or between 1999 and 2003, which, spoiler alert, never happened. So other than the whole worshipping Shoko Asahara thing, Aum Shinrikyo was a commixture of Indian Buddhism, Tibetan Buddhism, Hinduism, Christianity, yoga, and the writings of Nostradamus. Shoko claimed that he wanted to restore original Buddhism, but used Christian Millerian rhetoric, which just kind of focused on the Golden Age prior to the final judgment and future state of the world to come, which is very fitting with the whole Doomsday and apocalypse thing. The mission of Shoko was allegedly to take all the sins of the world onto himself. He claimed that he could transfer spiritual power to his followers and take away all of their sins and bad deeds. So in the whole Doomsday prophecy thing, Shoko prophesied that there would be a third world war that would be instigated by the United States, who he referred to as the Beast, like from Revelation, and saying that it would definitely attack Japan. Aum Shinrikyo co-opted a whole bunch of Buddhist doctrines and ideas, such as Mappo and Shobo, which is the 3 ages of Dharma. These are 3 divisions of time following the death of the Buddha. In the final time, which is Mappo, Dharma degenerates and the world becomes a place of chaos and immorality. In killing those who turned their backs on the Dharma and allowed the world to enter this sinful age, Shoko believed, I put it in quotation marks because who knows if he actually believed this shit or not. He believed that the killing of those people were defending the laws of Buddha, so it made it okay.
Yeah, like he had this twisted interpretation that although the laws of Buddha implied pacifism, that it would be more pacifistic because it would save more lives if they triggered this collapse of society and this world war prematurely. So they thought it was more in following the teachings of Buddha because it would result in less death and harm in the end if they triggered this collapse and this apocalypse.
The cult started really attracting bad attention. In 1989, Aum Shinrikyo gained official recognition as a religious organization by the Japanese government under the nation's religious corporations law. Japanese officials were initially super hesitant to grant Aum this status, largely due to a bunch of protests and complaints that had been filed by many of the families of existing Aum members over the group's requirement that followers sever all ties and communication with the outside world, including family and friends. So Aum responded to the Japanese government's reluctance with a fervent series of lawsuits and demonstrations, a practice that they would successfully employ many times in the future. Eventually, the cult would be successful. Under this status, Aum was free to do its thing without oversight by the government and got special perks like tax benefits, the right to own property as an organization, and the big one, which was protection from all state and external interference. The law specifically prevents authorities from investigating a group's religious activities or doctrine, which is a stipulation that is widely interpreted to include any activities an organization is involved with, including those raising revenue for the groups or other private corporations. So they basically had like a carte blanche to do whatever the fuck they wanted because the government couldn't check into them at all.
Yeah, government oversight and inspection toggled off.
Yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm. So now that they were legit, Aum's wealth and followers expanded rapidly. They established facilities in 6 different countries, and their net worth grew from around 430 million yen to more than 100 billion yen.
Yep.
This wealth came from a combo of legit and sketchy means, like donations from cult members, tithing, the sale of cult paraphernalia like books and videos, the manufacture of illegal drugs, hosting seminars and training courses, opening restaurants, opening software and computer companies.
Operations, as you can see in this map, scattered around the world. In Japan, not only did they have their spiritual headquarters, they also had a number of business enterprises. For example, they ran a chain of noodle shops in Tokyo and other Japanese cities, which were not only money-making enterprises, but also recruiting centers. They manufactured computers from components that they imported from Taiwan. It might be said that, by the way, these computers, which they sold in stores of their own in downtown Tokyo, were actually very well regarded by the consumer public. They were pretty high powered. They came with a lot of software. Well, okay, the software was all stolen, but the thing is, they were passing those savings on to the consumer. And that was very, very popular in Japan, not a country where bargains are very easily found. They had a tea plantation in Sri Lanka. In fact, apparently they still have a tea plantation in Sri Lanka. Why they had a tea plantation in Sri Lanka, nobody's precisely clear. As you can see, there are a number of diamonds in Russia, in the former Soviet Union. The cult invested very early in Russia. In fact, they invested while it was still the Soviet Union. They invested probably in the neighborhood of about $12 million, buying influence, buying access in Moscow. And they happened to hit it right at the right time because they found a Moscow that was wide open to being bought. In fact, at one point, the cult was in business with a man by the name of Oleg Lobov. The cult and Mr. Lobov had established an organization known as the Moscow Japan University. And it was located in some rather nice office space across the street from the Bolshoi Ballet. And Mr. Lobov doesn't appear to have done much except collected money for having established this facility, provided offices and facilities to the cult, and which is okay because Lobov had a day job. Lobov was also chairman of the Russian National Security Council for President Boris Yeltsin at the time. Cult had offices in Bonn, as well as in New York from the mid-'80s onward. You see one in Central Africa. In 1993, Shoko Asahara, the leader of the cult, and about 24 nurses and doctors who were members of the sect, went on a medical mission of mercy to Central Africa to treat victims of a serious disease outbreak in the former Zaire, now Congo. At least that was the cover story. In fact, they went to Zaire specifically to learn as much as they could about, and ideally, to bring back samples of the Ebola virus. In early 1994, on Russian radio, a cult member was quoted as saying that Ebola might make a very good biological weapon under certain circumstances.
Yeah, there's a lot of evidence that the LSD that they produced, made it across the ocean to North America. So, if you took LSD in the late 80s, early 90s, it may have come from Aum Shinrikyo. You never know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
They also got cash from bribes where they would bribe cities to not move there. If you don't give me money, we will set up shop in your city.
Oh, fuck, yeah.
People would be like, stay the fuck away, here's your money.
Yeah.
And they also had a relationship with the Japanese mafia. So,
naturally.
Yeah.
As one would.
You always would,
It's one of the earliest and one of the most well-known examples of Aum's murderous criminal activities occurred in May of 1989 when the group allegedly kidnapped and killed attorney Satsumi Sakamoto and his wife and his baby son. This family became Aum's targeted enemy when Satsumi began working with the families of several Aum members in lawsuits against the cult. At the time the family went missing, Sakamoto was working on 23 of these cases, which were aimed at forcing Aum to release followers who wanted to leave. So the Sakamoto family pretty much vanished overnight. Family members got worried when they hadn't heard from them and went to their house, and it was untouched, except that the family was gone. However, Sakamoto's mom found a badge with Aum insignia on the floor. Sus.
Yeah.
Do you know what I found on the floor?
What?
A letter that I've started writing to our next patron.
Oh.
Yeah, and as a matter of fact, we have a Patreon, patreon.com/OVpod. For $6.66 a month, you can sign up for the Leon Filger fan club, the Oud Gallifrey fan club, the Richard Bigley fan club, or the Sage Murray fan club, and we will write you a fucking letter and send you a care package. It'll be tight as shit. You can donate more money if you want, because we need like computers and mics and shit, and want to go look at some dinosaurs. So we need funding for that. Support local media. We're not owned by anyone, so we speak the truth most of the time. Fair enough?
Fair
also,
enough.
if you don't have $6.66 a month, you can also just give us $1 just to show your support, or go all the way up to $25, where we will actually make an episode of your choice for you.
Cool.
Just ask Miriam Delirium.
Yeah.
She knows all about it.
Oh, yeah.
Miriam Delirium does know.
Oh, yeah.
That's my plug.
Fuck yeah.
Good plug. So it would appear to reasonable people that the fact that Satsumi was working against the cult, that this would link Aum to the disappearance, but no, I wrote in all caps. The cops denied that the cult was involved and didn't want to investigate. Officials even went so far as to suggest that Sakamoto himself had organized his family's disappearance as a tactic to discredit Aum. Super sus.
Oh boy, whatever publication they put out to announce that it couldn't have aged well.
Right?
Man.
Yeah. So stupid. But when the media learned that the cops were avoiding an investigation into the link between the attorney and his family's disappearance and the Aum cult, they basically went crazy. This forced the police to investigate. Around 16 days after the family went missing, the cops finally took action and requested interviews with Aum leaders. Aum denied this request, and Ashihara went underground to avoid these questions until a few days later when he called a press conference in which he denied Aum's involvement. During the conference, Asahara also claimed that the discovery of the Aum badge at the home could have easily just been a coincidence, and stated that 40,000 of these badges had been produced and distributed to the public. In reality, less than 100 of those badges existed.
Interesting.
I know.
That's a smaller pool.
Yeah. So even with this conflicting statement and the super clear connection between the Sakamoto family and the Aum cult, the police did not pursue the case further, and the media eventually stopped covering it. 6 years later, in 1995, the bodies of Sakamoto, his wife, and their baby were discovered at 3 separate remote locations in the mountains.
Oh shit, that's a lot of effort.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. There was also an alleged assassination attempt against cartoonist Yashinori Kobayashi after he began satirizing the cult. I did learn that he's a sketchy dude, but we don't have time for him.
I may be wrong, but I think he may be the person who, when he saw the photos of Ashihara, like, doing his fake levitating, and Ashihara said, like, it's because I'm holy, it's because I'm enlightened, that's why I can levitate. He made his own fake photo of him levitating.
Oh.
Just saying, like, oh, I just, and he said something the equivalent of, like, oh, I just eat ramen and read novels, and and that's why I can levitate.
Yeah, and apparently that really pissed off Aum Shinrikyo.
Oh yeah, and that lawyer that you mentioned, you know what was one thing that really pissed them off? Ashihara claimed that he had special blood, that his blood was blessed and unlike any other human blood, so he just had his blood tested, and the lawyer announced the results live on a TV show and basically humiliated Ashihara. And that was a big reason why he went after him, like petty little shit like that.
Yeah, just like an angry toddler. A former member trying to leave Aum was also assassinated, and apparently all these people were killed by Aum's Minister of Internal Affairs, Tomomitsu Nimi. So he was like the murderous one, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, the one who, I guess, brought the hammer down and all that?
Yeah.
They were starting to get violent. More individual attacks now, going after individual critics and people who had insulted them or had insulted Ashihara, but they wanted to take their philosophy bigger. They wanted to get more violent. And the reason why is strange. They base their philosophy a lot on Isaac Asimov's Foundation trilogy. They've also talked about it both in their writings and what they thought about Isaac Asimov's work in that same breath. So, Aum Shinrikyo, this is where they're coming from. They wanted to build their new enlightened world on the ruins of the old. Ashihara thought he was gathering like smart people. He was gathering engineers and scientists and teachers and all these professionals. He thought they would hide from the world when the world collapsed, and then emerge again to be the philosopher kings of the new world. It sounds a lot like Plato, actually. Like, he thought that if he gathered all these talented people together, rode out the apocalypse with them, that he would be able to create a new enlightened world in the old world's ashes. And he wanted his cult to lead that. And now, the Foundation trilogy doesn't follow that same thing. It has a lot more nuanced story beats than what Shinrikyo had pulled at it, but this is an idea of what it's about. And Foundation is basically about a futuristic society where one scientist, through his math, his statistical math, where he's tracking trillions of humans in the galaxy, he has predicted a collapse on the horizon. That this grand empire that spans the Milky Way galaxy in the far future is due to fall. And he has the idea that he will make this base in a quiet part of the galaxy that will be able to ride out this apocalypse. And maybe through his influence and through work that he can do on that planet and suggestions he can make, they can shorten the collapse. So instead of 30,000 years of darkness, it can be contained to 1 millennia of darkness when society collapses.
Was the planet called Trantor?
I think the big main planet was called Trantor.
Well, Trantor is the one where they live underground.
Oh, yeah.
Trantor is the one that is the capital of the basically the Imperium or the Empire.
Yeah.
And its terminus is the one that the Foundation set up on. First as encyclopedists, then as mayors, then as whatever else.
Yeah. Okay, can I inject my story? So I don't remember much of the books, but this is an incredible story nonetheless.
Yeah.
About 10 years ago, I was at my family's vacation property in Maple Falls, Washington, and I had recently purchased a copy of Foundation. And I was in the laundromat at the vacation property, doing laundry and reading this book. And I got to the very end of the book and I was like, shit, it's a book in a series. Like, I wish I had the next book. And there happened to be a pile of books just sitting on the corner beside one of the washing machines, maybe 12 books or whatever. And I just quickly shuffled through the stack, and I'll be goddamned if it wasn't the second book in the trilogy.
Fuck yeah.
Wow.
Serendipity, eh?
Yeah.
So good.
As Shinrikyo does, it took certain themes in that book and it twisted it into its own narrative for its own good. So,
Hari Seldon.
Hari Seldon. Oh boy. So Dr. Seldon in the Foundation series is this guy that figures out the end of the world. Shoto Ashihara wanted to be Dr. Seldon. He wanted to escape with all these talented and smart people that he gathered underground and then emerge again. He wanted to do the same thing as the Foundation series, except what Shinrikyo wanted to do is they thought that they could intervene. They could kick off the apocalypse themselves and trigger it early. Push over the first domino that will cause humanity to collapse. And then after they do that, they retreat underground, hide, and then emerge when the world is destroyed, and they can be the rescuers of the new world.
So they sin real good to like call down the wrath and to just hide?
Pretty much. Basically what they wanted to do.
It's like a terrible sibling or something. Like,
oh, 1,000%.
Yeah, it's a small child that pushes over a vase, says, "It was so-and-so," and then runs away.
It was about this time that they were making these grander visions and plans, because as time went on, Shinrikyo's like vision and plan for this world collapse and them surviving the apocalypse, that grew and grew in like influence. It changed from like a philosophy to them actually stockpiling things, them creating things, them partnering with organizations, and it turned into a real live effort instead of just a philosophy. And just before they started their big attacks, Shinrikyo made friends within the Russian government. The Russian government gave them free professional military training from a paratrooper regiment. They gave them a helicopter. They gave them blueprints and information on how to construct dirty bombs and other nukes. And they also gave them plans to build other weapons. And then they allowed Aum Shinrikyo to propagandize to the Russian population, and 30,000 Russians, 3 times Aum Shinrikyo's population in Japan, joined Aum Shinrikyo in their own little pocket chapters of Aum Shinrikyo in Russia, and they all gave their belongings and tithes to Aum Shinrikyo, so their wealth and influence grew and grew.
But like, what was Russia's incentive for doing that?
Russia always plays a very long game. Russia will fund the enemies of its enemies in order to influence them. I'm not sure of the exact geopolitical situation, but I would put my money on that Russia's trying to play some kind of long game and trying to perhaps disrupt Japan through Aum Shinrikyo.
This has rings of like the CIA training Mujahideen that became Al Qaeda. It also kind of reminds me that like Russia lost pretty good to Japan during the Second World War in Port Arthur, so they might have just done it to be like, huh. Japanese people, fuck them. These guys want sarin gas? Go have some.
I mean, it's 40 years out from World War II. They're still in I forget when the Berlin Wall fell. Was that 1990?
I think it was 90.
The Cold War was still on-ish. Japan was part of the Axis powers, right? I mean, an enemy of Russia. So I can imagine like Russia wanting to unsettle Japan. Like they thought maybe this kooky Doomsday cult can be the vehicle they can do it with.
The Berlin Wall started to fall in November of 1989 and was finally finished demolition in 1993.
And that brings us actually right to where we are in the story. Of course, all this wealth and influence and gathering scientists and chemists and engineers had to lead to some giant project. You got to do something with all these professionals. And what they decided to do is mass produce weapons that are usually only used in mass war scenarios. And they started it out by testing on a sheep farm in Australia. Oh, it's an Australian word. This is the one I can't say. Banjawarn.
Okay, let's go with
Banjawarn
that.
Station.
Chaswazzer Station.
Yeah, so there was this place called the Banjawarn Sheep Station in Australia, and Aum Shinrikyo bought the property and decided to start to do tests there. So much stuff, other stuff with Aum Shinrikyo, everything that happened there was alleged. There's very little physical evidence and confirmations. It's a bunch of witnesses and stories, but apparently they tested 3 major types of chemical weapons and perhaps many more on these sheep in the Australian outback. These 3 things being anthrax, VX gas, and sarin gas. Sarin gas being the gas that they will use on the famous subway attack that everybody knows about.
Did I hear Australia?
Yeah, Australia.
In Western Australia, the cult purchased a sheep station, a ranch in Western Australia, about 200 miles outside of Perth. It was about 200,000 acres. And they purchased this in 1993. Initially, they purchased it because it had uranium ore deposits. And in fact, they requested an export license for uranium ore from Australia to Japan. Now, this was denied, even though the cult had already begun excavation of uranium ore for shipment. However, they had other purposes for that ranch as well. In 1994, fall of 94, the cult sold the station to an Australian family. That Australian family became a little bit anxious. They knew who they'd purchased it from, you see. So they called in the Australian authorities, and the military and the police came and took a look around the ranch. And what they found was a little bit unsettling. They found the area where the uranium ore had been being mined. They found drums with ore ready for shipment. They found 2 outbuildings which had been clearly used as laboratories at one time. In fact, some of the apparatus was still in those buildings. And they found an area in which the soil had clearly been fairly recently disturbed. So they dug it up and they found about 24 sheep carcasses. Did some testing, found that the sheep had all been killed with the nerve agent sarin. At some point in 1993 or early 94, Aum Shinrikyo had staked the sheep out at various distances from a release point. And then, using sarin, which they either smuggled in from Japan or manufactured in Australia, they used that chemical weapons agent to kill the sheep. It was their first testing of their new weapon.
So they tested all these things out on these sheep. Nobody knows really what happened there besides that basic description. There's rumors of a nuclear test happening there because apparently they were mining uranium at a nearby mine there. But when a seismologist went over the seismic activity of the time they were active at that ranch, he said he found a few seismic events, but nothing that looked like an explosive to him. So they probably weren't like building and testing dirty bombs out there, although they may have been mining uranium trying to. All this led to the 1993 anthrax attacks.
Well, anthrax is a naturally occurring disease. It's a zoonotic disease of herbivores, and that means domesticated animals such as sheep, goats, and also wildlife. It occurs throughout the world, which is indicative of the fact that the spore does occur in the soil throughout the world. Now, humans become infected under natural circumstances by contact with infected animals or contaminated animal products such as wool or hair or hides or bone meal, by either the cutaneous, the gastrointestinal, or the respiratory route. What happens is that the spore is the infectious form of the organism, and the spore enters the host, and then the spore germinates, that is, into a bacillus, a rod-like shape of the organism. And the organism then has the capacity to produce two toxins, the so-called edema toxin and lethal toxin, but it's the toxins that cause local damage to the tissues and the capsule that interferes with phagocytosis of the organism that enables the organism to survive in the host.
Okay. Colonel Edson, what would be the most effective way to disseminate anthrax as a VW weapon?
Well, Doris, the best way is through aerosol dissemination. One can affect more people by disseminating the organism by aerosol than any other way. Also, anthrax is most deadly by the inhalational route. The case fatality rate for inhalational anthrax is quoted by a variety of sources as between 80 and 100% of cases fatal in people who are exposed to an effective dose of the organism.
Okay. Colonel Friedlander, what about the incubation period?
Well, the incubation period for inhalational anthrax is from about 1 to 6 days. Presents with a flu-like illness of malaise, some fever, non-productive cough. There may be a period of improvement, and over the next day or two, it progresses to really the sudden onset of respiratory distress. This is marked then by some chest compression symptoms, pain in the chest, and stridor, so that there may be a change in the voice, and this is probably at the point where the disease, as we discussed, is spreading from the lymph nodes in the chest to the mediastinum. These severe respiratory symptoms then will progress over the next day or two with spread into the bloodstream of toxemia and eventually hypertension and death within 24 to 36 hours.
So then after you inhale anthrax, what does it do to the body?
Well, I think we have a video clip that will demonstrate that quite nicely. Once you inhale anthrax spores, those spores get down into the lungs. They're taken up by white blood cells in the lungs, pulmonary macrophages. Those macrophages do their job in the sense that they take up the spores, but they have a difficult time killing those spores initially. And so they end up serving as taxi cabs and transporting those spores to the nearest regional lymph node. And it's in the milieu of that regional lymph node that anthrax really flourishes. So once it's in the lymph node, the anthrax vegetates, comes out of its spore form into its vegetative form, starts reproducing, cranking out its toxins. The lymph node becomes necrotic and eventually breaks down, and from there the anthrax bacteria get into the bloodstream, circulate around to affect the rest of the body. Viable anthrax organisms clogging up a terminal blood vessel. I believe this is a scanning electron micrograph of a terminal arteriole, and you can see here at the time of death, it is absolutely chock full of viable Bacillus anthracis organisms. And one of our basic scientists estimated to me that at the time of death, 28% of the dry weight of blood is viable Bacillus anthracis organisms. Not difficult, I think, for the clinician out there to realize why you don't stand much chance of success if you wait to treat these patients. They need to be treated at the very earliest opportunity.
4:30 a.m., early morning hours, residents surrounding an 8-story building in Japan reported smelling a sour odor. Quickly over the hour, over 118 complaints came in, either through the police or other lines. Residents complained of numbness in their lips, nausea, dizziness, symptoms, and pets began to get ill. They quickly evacuated the building, and they found a group of strange men quickly fleeing in a vehicle, one of those men being Ashuhara himself. It took 4 days for the authorities to come to inspect the building, and by then the cult had come and taken all their equipment off the building and fled again. So there wasn't much left to find, but the one thing authorities did find is this black slimy sludge running down the walls of the building and all over the roof of the building. It turns out Aum Shinrikyo were testing out a strain of anthrax they wanted to use on a large-scale attack, but they fucked it up. Anthrax basics is basically a bacterium that resides in soil. Mostly it's inert, mostly it's harmless, but if it gets in the body and it propagates, it's able to become successful. It can cause major damage. It can get through a wound in the skin, it can be eaten through undercooked meat, it can be breathed in, or it can be injected directly in a muscle. It doesn't poison or kill right away. Usually you get it into your system, and then 3 to 10 days later, you have chest pain and trouble breathing, fever and profuse sweating, headaches and muscle aches, nausea and vomiting, and eventually the toxin that the bacterium produces reaches your heart and liver and kills them, and you can't live without those. It failed because they used a bad strain of anthrax that didn't propagate in the body well. The way they tried to aerosol it to spread in the air didn't work. It turned out to be big globby globs on the ground. They actually released it too late in the morning. They were planning to release it in the middle of the night, but the sun had started to come up in the morning, and sunlight made this strain of anthrax inert, so most of it was killed by the sun before it could even enter a human body, so all that was left was a big, slimy, stinky smell in the air, so it wasn't all that effective. But enough of it was effective to make some residents sick, but they didn't have enough bioload in their body to cause too much harm.
That's the title of a sex tape I made, by the way, one time.
100%.
What's that?
Bioload.
No, dark, slimy, sticky substance on the floor.
Oh, that too.
Bioload. I
like our logo.
I like that. If you fail once and quit, how could you ever know if you would have succeeded the next time? The 1994 Matsumoto attack. So their anthrax thing didn't work, so they decided to target the residents of Matsumoto for another test. All these are tests to say, how many people can we kill on a small scale, just in case we need to do it on a large scale later on? They wanted to target these 3 judges in this town. The whole town didn't want them there. They had a petition where 70% of the town signed it and said, we don't want Aum Shinrikyo in our town. And this pissed Ashuhara and Aum Shinrikyo off. And what put the final nail in the coffin is 3 judges actually passed a law that said that, specifically, Aum Shinrikyo is not legally allowed to own properties in this town. So they decided to target the judges. They drove into the judges' city, and they knew the apartment complex that all 3 judges stayed in. And they basically converted this freezer van into a sarin gas humidifier. They had 12 liters of liquid sarin gas, and they would basically heat it up until it turned into steam, and then use the blower fans on the outside of this car to blow it all over the outside of this building. And it worked fairly well.
The Matsumoto event in June of '94. Matsumoto is a very nice city of about 300,000 people, located about 200 miles northwest of Tokyo. It is, among other things, the gateway to the Nagano region, the gateway to the Olympics area, the Japanese Alps. Light industry, agriculture, tourism. In fact, the city is dominated by a 350-year-old shogunate-era castle, surrounded by a moat, a lovely setting. Not the kind of place you would think of when you start thinking about super terrorism. On the evening of June 27th, a Monday evening, sarin gas was released into a residential neighborhood, a neighborhood that had absolutely no political, military, or other symbolic importance, nothing that would make it stand out, or at least it seemed, as a terrorist target. Now, it was a warm night. People had their windows open. It was a dry evening as opposed to being wet. It was actually an ideal evening for disseminating a nerve agent. Local authorities, and I mentioned before, the police in Japan are very decentralized. So the Nagano Prefecture Police investigated this case. Now, Nagano police are far more comfortable with investigating petty crimes or traffic violations than they are looking into acts of WMD terrorism. And so they were not really up to this challenge. It was further compounded when no one stepped forward to claim responsibility. This wasn't a case of, pay me money or I'll do it again. This wasn't a case of this was a great blow for the such and such liberation army. This was just a killer wind that came in the night. And what we would ultimately learn in the course of the investigations and the confessions that followed was that this had been an attack targeted against the lives of 3 judges. 3 judges who happened to live in that neighborhood and who were about to hand down a judgment in a land dispute involving an obscure religious organization known as Aum Shinrikyo. The cult involved in this land dispute had determined they could not afford to lose the case. And so the leader of the cult took aside one of his members, his chief scientist, a man by the name of Hideo Murai, and he told Murai, take a team, go to Matsumoto, and kill these judges because we cannot have this judgment. We can't afford it. And since you're going anyway, why don't you take that new weapon that you've been working on and let's give it a field test. And so it was that 5 members of Aum Shinrikyo drove from the cult's headquarters to Matsumoto in this truck. Well, a truck not completely dissimilar from this one. The plan was very straightforward. They were going to park in broad daylight. They were going to release sarin into a chamber which would heat it up, raise it to its aerosol point, and release it as a cloud. A silent, invisible, odorless, tasteless cloud of pure death. That was the plan. It was to be done in broad daylight in downtown Matsumoto. What they did was they found that the 3 judges were living in a dormitory in this one neighborhood. They were all staying in the same dormitory. They pulled into a gravel parking lot adjacent to the area, turned on the chemical generator, and it released a cloud of sarin into this area. Now, the 3 buildings formed something of a courtyard. The dormitory was about 3 stories tall. These townhouses here were about 3 stories tall. This apartment building was about 5 or 6 stories tall. So it created essentially a courtyard. And just like leaves in a little breeze in a courtyard get swept up, so too did the sarin. Even though it's heavier than air, 5 or 6 times heavier than air, the currents lifted it up, raised it up into windows up on the 5th, 6th floor of some of those buildings. And thus it was that you had a number of people, including the judges, overcome by the chemical. To my knowledge, no ruling has ever been handed down in that land dispute either. The team got back on the road, drove back to headquarters, mission accomplished.
Sarin gas is a nerve agent. Basically, if you were to breathe it in as they administered it, it would basically paralyze the muscles of your lungs and your diaphragm, so that every time you breathe out, you'd be unable to breathe in. So, take one full breath in if you want to play along. Every time you breathe a little bit of it out, imagine that you can never get that breath back again. As your lungs exhale and breathe out, you can never breathe that back in again, and you're just paralyzed. You can never breathe in because your diaphragm's paralyzed, and you just suffocate, being unable to inhale. That's how this sarin gas worked, and they pumped it at 10:40 p.m. all around this apartment complex. People started immediately coming down with darkened vision, eye pain, headaches, nausea, diarrhea, numbness in their hands. A total of 274 people were treated at the nearby hospital. 7 were dead within hours, and an 8th victim remained in a coma for 14 years and then died. Dead fish were found in a pond near the scene, the bodies of dogs and birds and caterpillars were found littering the area, and even the grass and trees in the area had withered and discolored. Nearly all of the casualties were discovered within a radius of this van that was parked. So basically they parked the van, they turned on this sarin gas humidifier, they got out of Dodge, and the sarin gas leaked into this building and the area surrounding. They didn't end up killing any of the 3 judges, by the way, just people who were on the lower floors of this apartment. Because, of course, the higher class people could afford the suites at the top of the apartment complex. So the 3 judges made it out. Then there was the 94-95 VX gas attacks. They were using VX gas, which is a nerve agent that works a lot like sarin gas. And there was another target they used an organophosphate pesticide on. For that one, it was just a contact killing, where they literally had one person attack this person just as he was walking along, hold him down, and they sprinkled this powder on his neckline. And that contact through the skin was enough to poison him, and he went into a coma and died 10 days later. There was somebody that was just straight up stabbed to death. There was a person, a brother of a person who left the cult, and they were threatening this brother to give up the location of the former cult member. And they kidnapped him, and they put them into a microwave incinerator that they had purchased. A microwave incinerator is a special type of incinerator guaranteed to get to far higher temperatures than other incinerators in order to destroy biohazard and medical waste. They basically incinerated him for not giving up the location of the person who left the cult. All these attacks were escalating in severity and complication and the amount of know-how you would need to pull them off, using various very complicated chemicals.
Yeah, they keep getting more and more like super villainy.
Oh yeah, like this is the cult that like scares me a little because they got really far. Like if they didn't catch the people who did the subway attacks and they were allowed to pull any of this shit off with the amount of chemicals they had, they could have killed thousands easily, and they nearly did. Their biggest attack, and probably the last one I'll talk about tonight, is the 1995 Tokyo subway sarin attack. And this is the one that most people know about. So Tokyo rush hour, 7:45 a.m., everybody is commuting to work. 10 men from Aum Shinrikyo started their plan. 5 were going to get on trains, and each of them were carrying 2 bags full of sarin gas each, and they wrapped them in newspapers to hide them. And they also had a sharpened umbrella. The other 5 men were getaway drivers. So what they did is they entered these trains, put these newspapers that had a sarin gas bag on the floor of these trains. They took their umbrella and they quickly popped it, and then they walked out of the train and got in their getaway vehicle and got out. Most of them were able to pull it off. There was one that didn't really pierce his bags well enough, so that gas didn't really go off, and there was another where another problem happened. But on at least 3 train lines, these bags were punctured successfully and the gas got out. This is the type of damage that can be done, so each person was carrying 2 bags equaling about 1 liter of sarin gas. Estimates vary, but anywhere from 950 to 6,000 people were injured by this. A weird quirk of Japanese culture, it's estimated that the number varies so much because a lot of these people, even though they might have had like literal sarin gas attack, like gas damage on their lung tissue, and they may have gotten brain damage and they may have had reduced vision, the Japanese work ethic may have led some of these people to go into work anyhow. So a lot of these people were like, even though they're feeling sick as hell, the actual people injured by the attack may be double or triple the amount that went to the hospital because of it. So these 950 to 6,000 people had their oxygen levels restricted. Like I said, they were unable to inhale for a while. Their lungs were just clamped down. And because of that, they had tissue damage from that loss of oxygen. They also lost vision and had brain damage because of it. 50 were severely injured, producing serious cognitive or mobility problems that followed them the rest of their lives. And 14 people died that day. On that day, 688 ambulances were called and were taken in by multiple hospitals. In total, 278 hospitals saw about 5,510 patients by the end of the week that had come in to report symptoms.
I was a bit scared, but I had to take this train, so there's no other way, I guess.
Well, it's definitely a little scary. I don't appreciate that kind of thing because, those are definitely innocent people.
Safer than New York City, yeah. But I don't know about the safest. I haven't been all over the world.
because I still have a PTSD. I cannot sleep well, and very easy to get tired. Frequently, I need a nap. So I think I have my own business lifestyle, and and then also I feel a very instinctive anger once in a while, reacted to something.
I can say from the effects of the sarin that the vast majority of the patients have recovered and have been discharged, and that's very gratifying. Again, the high quality of the medical establishment and the medical care rendered was the single most significant issue in this area. The preparedness for chemical disasters in developed economies is becoming an issue that is more and more important. Every year, new chemicals enter the market. Issues concerning decontamination, antidotes, proper therapies for patients, increasing complexity. And these are things that developed economies are facing to a greater extent every day.
Their motivation, Asahara convinces the 5 men that the only way to save the world was to get rid of the non-believers of the world. Just like Sage had said, they wanted to purify things. They wanted to kill all the sins of the world so that Asahara could take them on himself, almost like a Jesus figure.
Yeah.
He'll be the sacrificial lamb that's going to carry all your sins, but first we have to execute everybody first so they can be saved. And in that way, it's a kindness, because it's less harm overall, because if we kill their dumb flesh bodies, but they're saved in the end, who cares? That's the kind of attitude they had. And they thought that this action would bring about the collapse of society and would allow them the chance to hide underground so that they could emerge to be the philosopher kings of the future. After this attack, the perpetrators were linked to the attack almost immediately. I think they did it by spotting the getaway vehicles, then tracking like ownership of those vehicles and going through the webway there. But either way, the perpetrators were linked to the attack, and then those perpetrators were linked to Aum Shinrikyo, and the entirety of Japan came down upon the cult. They raided their facilities and arrested many members involved in the attack. Chemical and other production facilities were dismantled. Their wealth and resources and all that were confiscated and sold off. And even Shoko Asahara himself was apprehended. It wasn't without incident. There were several moments of retaliation where people were killed trying to enter facilities, or there was just retaliation attacks on police or judges that ordered these searches. On the day that Asahara was arrested, the cult actually mailed a bomb to the secretary of the person who was responsible for ordering that. They wanted to kill him, but the secretary was the one who ended up getting her hand blown off by the bomb. Asahara himself was charged with 23 counts of murder and 16 other offenses. It was dubbed the trial of the century by the press in Japan, and Asahara was ruled guilty of masterminding the attack amongst various other sentences and charges, and he was sentenced to death. And on July 6, 2018, 23 years after the sarin gas attack, along with 6 other members of the cult, he was hung to death. The religion since then has split into several little subgroups. All of them are still under high government scrutiny. They've been stripped of their religious status. They've been mostly keeping out of trouble. There hasn't been any mass killings. There have been some suspect shit going on, but nothing on the level of Aum Shinrikyo. The most notable thing that has happened since that attack is a sympathizer, Kazuhiro Katsukabe, intentionally rammed his vehicle into a crowd of pedestrians in 2019, injuring 8 of them, and then he got out of the vehicle and injured a 9th person personally. And when he was arrested, he told authorities it was in retaliation for an execution, likely referring to Asahara's execution. That was the most recent thing, but other than that, the groups that it's fractured into, which includes Aleph, that formed in February 2000, and a Moscow group called the Circle of Light, they're minuscule in number. I think Aleph has 1,000 members, and they're under extreme surveillance. And Circle of Light is even smaller, only having about 106 members. But they're under surveillance, they have their religious status stripped.
Let me start by saying the young people I interviewed had so powerful experiences in the cult that even though they understood that it had ended up with criminality and they sought to separate themselves from it, they still longed for the mystical experiences as they thought them, that they had experienced, and the ties to the guru they had known. So it had a great hold on people. It seems that there are different estimates of how many people now belong to Aum Shinrikyo, perhaps about 2,000, but only a certain percentage of those actively. They have renounced violence, but they still have been apparently up to some of their old ways in forcibly detaining people who wanted to leave. They still express loyalty to their guru, and some of them feel that Asahara was misunderstood because it's impossible for ordinary people to understand godlike human beings. But having said all that, they don't, in their present state, seem to present a threat to anyone or to Japan. Yet, at the same time, it's troubling that after these revelations of criminal violence, that so many Japanese, perhaps particularly young Japanese, would still want to be part of this. And that speaks, I think, of the depth of alienation of young people in Japanese society. We forget that Japan, which has been a country of very great achievements, has also been a country in the modern era, since the Meiji Restoration of the late 19th century, of great confusion. The young disciples who came into the cult, and sometimes not so young disciples, didn't do so with an idea of destroying the world. They were spiritual seekers who were looking for some belief system and some spiritual meaning in their lives. The extreme totalistic guruism, as I tried to explain, really put them under the power of the guru, and he did have a vision of destroying the world. The average disciple didn't even know about the stockpiling of weapons until their use or attempted use. But the average disciple also had to fend off certain little and not so little indications that things weren't so well in the cult and that there were evidences of evil or violent behavior within the group. They were drawn, however, to the idea of the end of the world and to the idea of the world being deeply defiled. That, plus their absolute attachment to the guru, could take them over the hump, so to speak, into some kind of collusion in a vision of destroying the world. A number of these gurus, and certainly Asahara, are on kind of the edge of paranoia and paranoid psychosis. He functioned in a paranoid way all through his relatively successful control of his cult. That balance breaks down when he ceases to really achieve the full loyalty of his disciples. And as soon as disciples leave a guru, he may break down. And when Asahara was imprisoned, there's a process I call deguruization. They ceased, of course, the police and others ceased treating him as a guru, and then in court, some of his closest disciples condemned him as a false guru, and then he seemed to fall apart more. So certain gurus are on the edge between simple paranoia, where you can function, and paranoid schizophrenia or paranoid psychosis, where you break down, and that breakdown tends to follow upon loss of control of one's environment and over one's disciples particularly. Certainly one's childhood has a lot to do with that behavior. That's a fair enough question. What is to be done? There's no easy answer to what is to be done, because we function in a democratic society, and we can really take legal action against people only when they break the law. But one has to be at least knowledgeable about some of these cultic patterns, about certain kinds of theology of the end of the world and of the activism or degree of pressure to carry through that theology, that end of the world theology, or what I called an activist Armageddonist or activist guru. And sometimes one has to take forcible police action where they do break laws, and one wants to be as knowledgeable as possible about them. I think there's been some knowledge gained, and there have been certain negotiations in recent year or two with right-wing groups so that they've ended a couple of standoffs short of violence in a way that they tragically failed to do at Waco, where the government made a vast mistake in attacking a group and in a way carrying out leading them to see carried out before them their fantasies of Armageddon. More basically, these groups tend to develop and to develop destructively in times of great social change and social confusion and chaos. So the more we're able to distribute the benefits of society in some reasonable way, and therefore give people some sense of potential achievement or meaning in their lives, the less these groups will threaten us. That's a large issue, but you see that kind of issue as important in terms of many of those enlisted for the radical right and the violent right, who are farmers who've lost their farms or people who have lost any sense of significance in their lives in various ways.
The legend kind of ended there with the breaking up of the cult, but what could have been is what's scary, I think. I think this cult very well could have brought upon a mass genocide, death of thousands, if they were allowed to continue to operate for much longer, because they were motivated and they had the means to do so.
They had the brains, the people power, everything.
It's just like I find it like oddly a little frightening, like because like I wasn't really in following cults until like I started following you guys.
Yeah.
So we're having this what they call like the psychedelic renaissance, like LSD, mushrooms, and all that are making a comeback. We're like staring down the barrel of like decriminalization or legalization and a possible medical model and all this kind of stuff. And I'm wondering, we haven't, as far as I know, we haven't had a good example of psychedelics and actualization go well, and like especially when we have like the lenses like the patriarchy and like all the other like isms and all the like all the bad shit that's happening here. I hope people aren't under the false assumption that like you just take psychedelics and you're better. Like it will amplify whatever is there.
LSD influenced cult that tried to bring about the end of the world.
And like, and how long ago was this one?
90s. Like
90s? Is there a timeline for all of these like different cults but have a drug element to them? Like, do we have a timeline of?
Oh yeah, like there was cult groups beforehand, but for some reason, whether we started paying attention to it more or whether it was a change in the culture or both, there was a big renaissance of crime of many types in the 60s and 70s. Not of all crime, but just of certain weird types. The amount of cults that arisen in the 60s and 70s exploded.
Well, again, because like the rise of psychedelics at the time was just like
and New Age spiritualism. It allowed like people to become excited about these new movements, and they were too invested at a point to get out, and a lot of people found themselves trapped. And also serial killers took off in the 60s and 70s. They were numerous as fuck for mysterious reasons.
Also, using all those feel-good psychedelics allowed people to be able to more easily manipulate and take control.
The question is about how I reconcile the quest for meaning with sexual and economic exploitation of people, ordinary people in the cult from above. Well, Asahara followed certain tantric Buddhist practices of sexually initiating certain female disciples. That's not unusual in many different cults for a guru to attempt to do it, to carry through. And this was put forward as a kind of form of transmitting sacred energy. Also, people were expected economically to give all of their life savings, and they did, to the cult, and really to extract as much as possible of family holdings, so that the cult became extraordinarily rich. And they also had various businesses and sold things and were as much of a commercial group as they were a spiritual group. This kind of combination of sexual and exploitation is not unusual, and it isn't necessarily experienced through a great deal of it as exploitation. That is, I interviewed one woman who didn't have sexual relations with Asahara, but she seemed to envy those women who did and was very drawn to him and even had orgiastic experiences just thinking of him. And she couldn't condemn his sexual activities with other disciples because she thought it was in the service of spiritual attainment and transfer of spiritual energies. So these are forms of sexual and economic exploitation, but might not be experienced as such in the process.
I think a lot of it too is that they stopped, because it used to be that psychedelics were just like the hippies, and hippies were free love and all these positive things.
Oh, now it's entrepreneurs and
not all of them, but hippies were associated with this good stuff. So
Yeah.
psychedelics was also associated with it. But then eventually we kind of got out of where hippies are an actual thing anymore.
Yeah.
Like, the hippies now are in their 60s and they're boomers. And they're shitty boomers, lots of them. Like my father.
Yeah, like they forgot they went through that phase at
Satan.
all.
When it comes down to it, like I think people are more able to take psychedelics now, not think about, oh, this has to have good things, or just that like, hey, everything in my mind is a good thing.
Yeah.
There's like it's being peddled like it's gonna do a lot, and it can, but like I don't know.
We really did have a whole bunch of weird serial killers.
Yeah.
70s, 80s, 90s, hey? Like, before that was like, okay, Ed Gein and not much else in the 50s.
Yeah.
But then you had like Richard Ramirez, you had that guy.
Son of Sam, Jeffrey Dahmer, Ted Bundy.
And it's mostly
Gacy.
America. Like, America is statistically weird. Per capita, they have way more serial killers than anywhere else. Per capita, they have way more cult activity than anyone else. What is it about America that generates these things?
I don't know. We got Robert Pickton. That's kind of gross.
Yeah, we did that. Yeah, he's a big player. But like that's the other thing. Like the more Americanized the country is, the more likely it is to have an above capita number of serial killers.
Yeah, I think that might like largely have to do with like more of like what we have left for warring nations, because we're pretty much just dealing with like again like the intergenerational trauma of a war.
Yeah.
And, like how like this is like yeah.
Yeah, World War II. Yeah,
We haven't really recovered. Like there was a big boom like during the first psychedelic renaissance. There was a boom of everyone returning from war, and just Weyburn Hospital was just overflowing with schizophrenia presenting patients. Like that was the thing after the war, because people couldn't handle what happened at war.
Yeah.
One thing I did find that I don't know that you covered, and I think you might have missed.
Possibly.
There were 7 Aum Shinrikyo members who were executed on the 6th of July 2018, including Shoko Asahara.
Oh yeah.
And then another 7 or 6 after that. So like they have bumped off 13 of them.
Yeah, and most of the people directly involved with one of the attacks I mentioned, or even some like other stuff. Japan is right up the remnants of Aum Shinrikyo's ass right now. But it's surprising he got this far, that he's able to convince professionals in their field, like PhD level people, to build weapons of mass destruction. I mean, they were well on their way. I'm sure they had plans to do it bigger and better next time,
Yep. Do I really want our CEOs or our politicians taking psychedelics? It's a fucking toss up.
Cults attract people from all varieties.
Yeah.
I mean, you just look at the U.S., they've got Congress people who are big QAnon fans.
Yeah.
And that's like their identity. That's their ticket to being elected. So, I mean, it's not, I don't think education necessarily is something to like reflect on in terms of this sort of thing. I think it's just cults have an appeal to certain types of people, regardless of profession or education.
Community appeals to almost all.
Exactly. If it offers a community and that's what you're lacking at the time, you'll just get sucked right into it.
Yeah, and like if people are looking for meaning and they're not satisfied with what they have already, like people of all different levels have that. Like there's disaffected people that make $5 million a year, and there's disaffected people that make nothing, And,
Once again, it's like it's the PR that they used.
Yeah.
To kind of help attract those people. Because I mean, like if you think of it, like Father Yod and the Source family, like they attracted
deep pull.
Episode something.
Might be in the single digits. Yeah.
Insert number here.
Yeah.
But yeah, they attracted like all like the gorgeous free love hippie types, and that's what they wanted. And Aum Shinrikyo attracted like nerdy smarticles.
So it's kind of like poll on 4chan then, right? The poll board.
Ew.
Oh no. I think so though.
I mean, there seems to be a lot of parallels.
Yeah. Yeah, and then QAnon attracts people who are sticky.
Well, you're getting your booster, so you're going to be magnetic again.
That's
too,
true.
Right? Yeah.
That's true. I'm happy to. I'm going to be getting my 3rd autism with my booster shot, so that should be fun.
My 5G coverage is just unparalleled right now.
I have such good signal strength. Also cancer. Yes. But yeah, that's about all for Aum Shinrikyo. Me and Sage, part of the reason that this podcast started is because me and Sage loved this one podcast called Last Podcast on the Left a whole bunch, and they did like 4 hours of Aum Shinrikyo coverage. And when I started to research, I'm like, there's no way I'm learning anything new. And then like, there's so much we didn't even cover that Last Podcast didn't even cover. These people were busy.
Yeah, they were busy as fuck.
Yeah.
You probably have to listen to like at least 8 separate podcasts covering different stuff to get like the whole magnitude of this bullshit.
So how long did they reign for?
I think they changed their name in 83 and then the Tokyo subway attacks in 95.
So for those of us that can't math.
Like 12 years.
Oh, yeah. You can do a lot of shit in that time.
Oh, yeah. Especially when you have, professionals and the wealth and the support of the Russians.
Oh, and the brainwashing power of LSD.
The Russians just gave him a helicopter. I just skimmed over that, but the Russians just like, hey, you want a helicopter? Hey, make some trouble for us. Yeah. I don't know what that accent was. But anyways, for Occulte Veritatis, I've been Ood Gallifrey. And in studio with me,
Sage Berry,
Leon Pilger,
Richard Bigley,
the soundboard demon,
Henry Chapman,
Geo the Void.
If somebody asks you to transport a bag full of gas on a train, just say no. See you next time.
Love you, bye.
Bye-bye. Alrighty, playing us out, we have a song recorded in Japan nearly 100 years ago. The artist is Masao Fujiwara, and the song's name, when translated into English, is You Will Find Happiness Beyond the Mountainside. Enjoy and see you in the after show. So being the graduate of a Canadian university in the prairies, I love a good drinking story. And one of our listeners, a Dr. Avocado, has sent us 3 drinking stories in an email. They're a bit too long to all fit in one after show, so I'll split them up as I read them and put them into the next few after shows, pepper them in. If you have a story you think that we would find interesting, or hilarious, or shocking, send it in. This is drinking story number 1 from Dr. Avocado. To Ood, Sage, and Leon. Let me preface this by saying it has nothing to do with the case, as I only heard the intro. I'm referring especially to the What's Their Poison portion, and needed to add my puking stories as you are all just as dark as I and will find them mildly funny. And if you don't find it funny, you'll at least be able to understand the pain of those 2 nights. So, for some reason, when I puke, I typically puke really, really hard. To the point that, more often than not, I actually pop blood vessels in my eyes. And not just a little. It's usually anywhere from half of the white of my eyes is blood red to the entirety of the white of my eyes being blood red, so that's fun. So moving on to the 2 worst instances I remember. The first story is from when I was around 18. I went to a house party with a best friend, and started off with a few beers, and then once back at her place proceeded to polish off half a Mickey of sourpuss. That sourpuss goes down way too easy. Then half a 2-6 of vodka, and finally started to work on half a 2-6 of whiskey. Dear God, I was a bar star in college, and I think even my most heavily drinking days, I think that would knock me on my ass. I'm not really sure how far I got on that one, but I would like to say about half of what was left. I think he's referring to the whiskey bottle. Then it became the best idea in the world to make spaghetti, and we ate it. And I eventually remember laying on the floor, and it was dubbed bedtime, where she and I proceeded to have a 10 to 15 minute conversation, which I've seen played back in video form, but I only remember the first 2-ish minutes of the video, and then my memory blacks out from there. Cut forward to the morning, 7 a.m., I wake up. I'm now shirtless, lying next to a pile of spaghetti. And when I say spaghetti, I mean it looked like somebody took a bowl of spaghetti and turned it upside down on the floor and removed the bowl. I'm not certain I even chewed it, but that's besides the point. I then went on to hunt for my shirt, which was in the bathtub of all places, and I said, alright, fuck it. And I walked back to the spaghetti and got most of it cleaned up, and that's when she came out of her room, his best friend, and said, no, don't worry about this, I got this, you go shower while I toss your clothes in the laundry. If that doesn't deserve an MVP for life, I don't know what does. Honestly, I'm clumsy in the kitchen at the best of times, so the fact that you were able to make something that involved browning hamburger and boiling water while you were blackout drunk, that's not too bad. The fact that it didn't make it into a bowl is like the least surprising thing. All the steps that preceded that seem more complicated than get the spaghetti in a bowl, but so the fact you didn't do that last step, that's pretty impressive. Yeah. Tune back in next episode. We'll read Story 2 from Dr. Avocado. And if you want to send in your stories for us to read, or correspondence on the podcast, or anything else you would like us to email, feedback@ovpod.ca. Or to send it to one of our social media links. Just look up Occulte Veritatis Podcast on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, wherever we reside. Alrighty, see you guys next week, where we will examine a group of people that throughout history have had a stigma attached to them for no real good reason. That's right, we're talking about left-handers. See you next week.